Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Happiness Festival organized by the Happiness Institute, sponsored by Going Live. Today, we are very honored to have Professor Christian Busch joining us to give us a talk on serendipity, the science of serendipity, how to transform uncertainty into opportunity. Dr. Christian Busch is a long-term friend of mine. He's a professor at New York University, where he directs the CGA Global Economy Program. He's a visiting fellow at the Marshall Institute in London School of Economics. Previously, he also co-directed the LSE's Innovation and Co-Creation Lab and served as a course leader. He is a co-founder of Sandbox Network, a leading community of young innovators active in over 20 countries, as well as Leaders on Purpose, an organization convening high impact leaders. He's a member of the World Economic Forum, Expert Forum, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And he also recently finished a book on serendipity, which is the topic of today. So I will hand over to Christian now.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction here. It's great to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's a delight to be here and to speak with you about something that has brought so much joy and so much happiness to my life over the last kind of decade. That I'd love to share that with you and really make that a conversation. So I'd love to, if you want to reach out afterwards or continue that conversation some way or the other, I'd be delighted to do so. The context here really is I had an experience early on in life which made me realize how quickly life can be over, a car crash, and that's kind of like introduced a certain urgency into my life and trying to figure out, okay, how can I find some kind of meaning, some kind of purpose in this world that next time, if something like this would ever happen again, it would have been worth it. And so kind of on this search for meaning, I went first into community building, then into more company building and trying to figure out what are ways there to somehow enable people to make things happen. And then now in academia, trying to make sense out of it. And one of the things that popped up everywhere I looked in a way that seemed to be what kind of the most successful, joyful people seem to have in common is that they intuitively cultivated serendipity. They intuitively turned the unexpected into positive outcomes. And so people would always consider them as being a bit more lucky than others or being the ones who are a bit more kind of successful or joyful than others. And so I've been fascinated by trying to understand what is it about this. And this is really the conversation of the talk today. This is, of course, particularly relevant in a world as we're living in at the moment in terms of COVID and other kind of big challenges that are all about uncertainty and how we can cope with that kind of uncertainty. And so we see things such as, breweries who turn into hand sanitizer companies, or we see kind of the most random of occurrences of people redefining their lives because now, out of necessity, they have to rethink what they can do in this world, and so it's almost like a collective near-death experience that we're living through. That, in a way, is for us here in New York, and I'm sure wherever you are in the world, has been quite challenging. But also, it's something where we can really reframe and redefine a lot of the things that bring us meaning and bring us joy. Serendipity then at the moment happens, of course, a lot where people somehow, turn unexpected moments into something different, being that hand sanitizer or other means. But it's been something that has happened throughout history, of course. I mean, and even in our own lives, right? If you think about something like how you might have run into the love of your life in a supermarket, you struck up a conversation, you saw some kind of connection, and then somehow it turned out to the two of you came together. Or maybe you met your co-founders that way. But also there's a lot of things, of course, in science and in innovation that happened that way. I mean, one of the most popular ones, of course, is the one where a couple of decades ago, a couple of researchers were injecting people with a kind of medication to cure angina. And they saw some kind of movement happening in the trousers of participants. And that was unexpected. There was an unexpected trigger that happened. And, what would we usually do? We would say, oh, my God, this is embarrassing. Let's ignore it. Let's figure out a better way to cure angina. What they did was the opposite. They said, well, OK, this is unexpected that this is happening, this movement. But actually, we know that a lot of men in the world have problems with erections, right? So why don't we try to figure out how to make that into a medication as well? And that's how Viagra came about, right? It was something completely unexpected, but then people connected their dots. They did something with it that then led to, for a lot of people, a positive outcome. We also see that in the area of organizations. So, for example, a couple of years ago, a Chinese company that produces washing machines and refrigerators, they got a lot of calls or kind of information from farmers. And the farmers said, well, look, we tried to wash our potatoes in your washing machine, but somehow it always clogs down. It never really works. What would we usually do? We would sell, well, don't wash your potatoes in a washing machine, right? This company did the opposite. They said, okay, it's unexpected that they're doing this, but you know what? There's a lot of farmers in China. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? Again, there was something unexpected, but there were people who said, okay, let's connect the dots to a problem here and make it happen. Again, it seems like something that was completely serendipitous, but it was an active process, again, of connecting the dots. And that's really what I find most fascinating about serendipity, that, a lot of times we might assume that it's just something like blind luck that just happens to us, right? Like being born into a good family or something. But actually, serendipity is all about the process of spotting something unexpected and then connecting the dots. So it becomes smart luck. It becomes this kind of thing that we can actually influence, where there is something unexpected happening, like this movement in the trousers or farmers calling up the company. But then we have to connect the dots and we have to have the tenacity to do something with it. And so when we have this process, then at every step of this process, we can do something about it. We can set ourselves up for the unexpected and turn that into positive outcomes. Of course, a lot of times we are missing that serendipity because we might not see the trigger, or we might ignore it, or we might not see how it links to something else. Now, there's a lot of kind of really interesting experiments, actually, especially around the question of how do we essentially create our own luck. And so, for example, there's one experiment where they picked a person who self-identifies as extremely lucky. So someone who says, I have luck all the time, good things always happen to me, and someone who self-identifies as extremely unlucky. And they asked them, okay, walk down the street, go into a coffee shop, sit at the table next to the counter, and just, have your coffee and enjoy. What they didn't tell them is that there were hidden cameras across the street, that there was cameras in the shop hidden, and that there was a 5-pound note placed in front of the door. And then inside the coffee shop, at the table, there would be this extremely successful businessman who can make big ideas happen. Now, the lucky person walks down the street, sees the 5-pound note, picks it up, is excited, goes into the coffee shop, has a conversation with the barista, sits next to the businessman, has a nice conversation, they get along. We don't know if an opportunity comes out of it, but obviously it wouldn't be unexpected, right? The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the 5-pound note, goes into the shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, the other person's left, sits next to the businessman, ignores the businessman, that's it. Now, at the end of the day, they asked them, so how was your day? And, the lucky person says, well, it was an amazing day. I found money in the street. I made new friends. And we don't know if an opportunity came out of it, but it might well have, right? The unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And that's one of these kind of themes around where we see that a lot of times the way we frame the world and the way we look at the world actually is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, even if you have exactly the same situation happening. We have to do something with the situation and have to, in a way, imbue meaning and see things in the world in order to create that kind of own luck in whatever context it is. Of course, there's so a lot of my work is in very resource-constrained contexts, in very low-income contexts. So a lot of times the serendipity base level, so the base level of what we can do, is much lower than if you're somewhere in the Upper East Side here in New York. But the core idea is that in a lot of different contexts, there's a certain agency that we have that is all about how we frame the world. And I'll dive deeper into that in a second. But so one way to look at serendipity is really to say, okay, what are the active aspects when we think back on all the kind of serendipitous things that happen and really see the patterns in that, but also comparing counterfactual, so comparing what could have happened. So, for example, there's a couple of decades ago, two researchers, approximately like at similar times, injected papain, so an enzyme, into rabbits, and the rabbits' ears flopped, and they were trying to understand, oh my God, why do these ears flop? Only one of them went through with it, and it turned out that this could become a really good way to tackle arthritis, the disease, and it paved like a lot of research towards like a Nobel Prize in the end, and the other one didn't really follow up on it. So again, like it was a lucky encounter that this happened. It was lucky that something turned out to be life-changing medication, but actually only one of them really connected the dots and did something with it, and that in the end led to that kind of outcome. Now, the question, of course, becomes, why does it then happen to some people and not others? Of course, there's a lot of biases that a lot of us have, right? We constantly underestimate the unexpected. We always believe we can plan things out and then, it will somehow happen. But in management, for example, around 50% of success of marketing plans, everything else is unexplained variance. So it's these kind of things that just happened coincidentally, or that just came about and that are there. But we think we can really map things out. And then what we're doing, of course, is we post-rationalize. So, all of us, for example, who have a CV, if we ever presented a CV when we have a new job, right? Or when we're trying to get a new job, we would say, yeah, I did this, and then I did this, and then I wanted to do this. Yeah, but you know what? We're just connecting the dots at hindsight here and then trying to tell that story. But actually, the real story, of course, was much more like a squiggle. And so the issue a lot of times is that we plan something out step by step, then life happens, but we're still telling the story as if it was step by step by step, because it gives us this sense of control. It gives us this sense that we can navigate it all. But of course, this is not how life works. And a lot of times we might not then tell real stories, but we tell stories that just sound good. Now, there's of course a couple of ways we can go about this and really cultivate serendipity and cultivate these kind of outcomes. I want to focus on a few that we can directly put into practice. One of them is setting hooks. So there's a wonderful entrepreneur in London, Ollie Barrett. And so if you would ask him this kind of dreaded question, what do you do? He would answer you setting a couple of hooks. So he would say something like, well, I'm in education, but recently I've started exploring philosophy, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. So now what he did was he gives you 3 potential dots where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I just set something up around piano playing, let's talk. Or, oh my God, such a coincidence. I've been excited about philosophy since I'm a kid. The point here is that by not just giving one kind of lane, but by putting potential dots out there, we allow other people to connect the dots for us. That also happens, of course, in a lot of different ways that we could dive deeper into. But at this point, it's really about saying, how do we see these different types of dots out there? Of course, also, we can look at mistakes or crises differently. So to give you an example, in one organization, what they do is they do post-mortems or project funerals, where usually, when a project doesn't work out, we try to hide it away. We're trying to say, oh, well, it never really happened. But actually, what they do is the opposite. They say, well, real learning comes from talking about what didn't work. And it's not about celebrating the failure. It's about celebrating the learning from what didn't work. And so in this case, when the project doesn't work, a project manager stands in front of other project managers and talks about what they learned from that kind of mistake. And so in one case, it was about a kind of window glass and that wouldn't reflect light. And it's an amazing technology, but they underestimated that nobody would really pay a lot of money for it. So what they put this to rest in front of the other project managers and said, hey, look, next time we'll think more about the market. Now, someone in the audience is like, hey, have you considered what this means for solar? Have you considered if that technology, because it absorbs so much energy and light, could actually be really amazing for solar solutions? And that is how part of their solar division emerged. Now they would say, oh, there was just luck, there was just serendipity. Yeah, but they set up a process internally that allowed them to have more of this happen, because people are allowed to connect the dots for each other, because they're not hiding them away, but actually they're saying, here they are, and now let's do something with it. Now, a third thing is around redefining situations. That's really something that I've seen particularly play out in resource-constrained environments, because if you don't have resources, you reframe a situation. So, for example, there's a wonderful organization called Reconstructed Living Labs in South Africa. It's a local community that said, okay, we don't have a lot of resources, but we have this low-cost education methodology here. And if we want to take that into different contexts and we don't have resources, we need to make the best out of what is already here. And so what they do is they go into a local community and they say, instead of say, hey, what do we need here? They say, what do we already have? So, okay, there's an old garage. Great, that could be a training center. There's a former drug dealer. Fantastic. That person has a lot of social capital. That person is very creative. And if they tell their story of how they made it now from previously being a drug dealer to being a teacher, that really gives not only hope, but it also shows the trajectory of what's possible. And so what they're doing is, by reframing these situations, people get into the modus of, oh, I can create my own luck. And then actually a lot of times start building their own companies, start building their own initiatives, and partner up with other organizations that then bring in resources. But the point being, really redefining these kind of situations locally. A fourth point is really around kind of setting serendipity bombs or setting serendipity mines. Martin Griffel, for example, in New York, who's a wonderful entrepreneur, one thing he would do is he would send out like just simple update emails where he puts a couple of points in about what he's been up to and what he's been looking into. Or we can, on LinkedIn, there's the in-mail function where we can send emails to other people that we might admire and just kind of update them on something, even if we don't know them yet, and really kind of getting people into that idea of, oh, hey, I just wanted to expand into this direction. That's interesting. What a coincidence. Okay, let me connect with this person. So really putting potential dots out there and seeding potential or planting potential serendipity bombs. Within organizations, we can also do that by, in meetings, for example, just asking things like, oh, what surprised you last week? And, share it with us and talk about like, what is something out there that really, enables us to think differently about what's happening. Now, a fifth aspect, and really one that, in a Corona type world, of course, is how do we leverage technology? And there's a wonderful entrepreneur in Nigeria, Uzoma, who was running one of the biggest banks there. And one of the approaches they use is they build in a lot of low probability ideas of what could happen, right? So how people might use their app differently online or something. And so they always have an aspect in there where if someone decides I want to use this app differently, they can feed in that kind of idea. And then if it resonates similar to the potato washing machine, they can easily kind of build in those different types of options. The idea here is that they build into the technology an appreciation of the unexpected, and that allows them to really turn that into something. And then the most important and last point really is about something that, particularly when it comes to the question of finding meaning, finding happiness, finding joy, is really that idea of how do we know where we're going? How do we know what to connect the dots to? What gives us a logic for doing that? And that is really a lot about developing a certain North Star or a certain principle or something that allows us to navigate and to know, to have a sense of direction. And so to give you an example, if you look at someone like Paul Polman, for example, the ex-CEO of Unilever, like people always thought, oh, he's always taking on these kind of random coincidental things. Yeah, but he was very, very conscious of, hey, I want to build platforms that enable others to be their best selves, right? And if I can use Unilever to do that, perfect. But then also, if you bring me opportunities, they have to fit into that kind of North Star. If they don't, this is my filter. Then I say no. And so he built in a smart filter that allowed him to navigate. That's also something that here in New York at the moment, Governor Cuomo has been doing. He missed a bit at the beginning, like the couple of Corona things, but he built a lot of trust here with constituents because he essentially said, my principles are, I will only open up once public health and economic health, or these are kind of my two broader ideas of where I want to go is public health and economic health. I also have an approximate plan, right? We will open up as soon as XYZ things are in place, but I will not give you a specific date for this because I would be lying to you. I would probably have to change that date because we will need to make these decisions based on the data that are coming in. And so in a way that was really smart because he gave a sense of direction, but also he now can still do the best with the data he gets in. And essentially, rather than having to hide data, as we see in other states where people say, oh my God, this doesn't fit into my plan, I have to pretend that data doesn't exist, they can be open to the new data and reinterpret as it comes in. And that's, of course, something that's the same in organizations where once we develop this understanding and this idea of, okay, let's have a bigger idea here where we want to go, but also let's have an appreciation of the unexpected data that could come in, that allows us then to have serendipitous things happen, that allows us then to really navigate and adapt to whatever is happening. Now, everything I talked about now, these are just a couple of strategies of how we can set ourselves up for the unexpected. But what really lies behind this is this kind of fascination that, in a world that is so full of uncertainty, and Viktor Frankl has been doing a lot of work around this, that in a way between a stimulus or a trigger and the response, there's this space. And in this space, there's our power to choose our response. And in this response, there's really like our growth and our freedom and a lot of the joy that we can have, because it's kind of really saying, if we look at uncertainty and things that we can't control as something we have to minimize, as something that is a risk, and we have to get away from it, that is, of course, very anxiety enhancing. That is, of course, something that makes us feel really kind of nervous about the world. And I've certainly been there as a kind of planning German type person. But actually, once we really find that as in every moment, in every kind of small thing, there could be meaning, there could be something that gives us joy, that gives us the next kind of opportunity, that gives us something that serendipitously emerges up, it really kind of gives us back this enthusiasm for life. And I've seen that a lot in my own life and the life of others, that, as soon as we reframe the world as the unexpected potentially being something that doesn't, disturb our life, but actually that can add even more beauty and joy and happiness to our life, then actually we are truly in control rather than having just an illusion of control. With this, thank you so much. As Kayun mentioned, and my editor reminded me that I should mention that there's a book coming out now, actually, which is the Serendipity Mindset, which covers some of this, and then also the bigger picture around these themes. For now, thank you so much. I'd be delighted to keep in touch, and see you soon, I hope.
Thank you very much, Christian. Fascinating talk, fascinating stories about the potato washing machine, and also I find it's extremely relevant to the current situation people are living through with uncertainty and a global crisis. So I think it will be really interesting if you could elaborate a little bit more on how you see serendipity, the role serendipity mindset can play to help us transform the current situation into something that is more empowering and positive. And I think 2020 has been a unique year that we are all experiencing. The world is flat, which is powered by technology, which is hyper-connected. And also there is clearly the emergence of a new economy, which can be greener, which is more human-centric. So I'm seeing a lot of positivity from the back of a crisis. So I don't know what are your thoughts on the roles that serendipity can play, and also any practical advice for the global audience that they can apply to use serendipity mindset in their daily lives.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mean, at the end of the day, at the moment is a really interesting point of reflection also, right? In terms of really thinking about what is it that we want to stand for as individuals, as companies. What is it, especially now that a lot of individuals and companies are literally fighting for survival and fighting for, okay, what can I do now? One of the things, so Hubert Joly, the chairman of Best Buy, he said that beautifully in terms of that at the end of the day, the unexpected defines who we are. and it really brings out the best or the worst in people, right? It kind of, we see that now in terms of leadership. We see that some people are really kind of taking real leadership and find creative ways to, for example, not let people go, but rather maybe still pay them, but then that will be added as overtime later on, whatever it is, but just kind of creative ways that allow them to stick to whatever their core values are, versus others who are just kind of, going with the flow, and somehow in 5 years they will still be asked, right, what did you do during COVID? And I feel like, as someone who comes from a country, Germany, where a lot of my conversations with my grandparents were around, what did you do during the war, right? What did you do during the time that really mattered? And it was a lot of times shameful conversations, right? Because you're like, okay, there's a lot of things that people don't want to talk about. And I feel like Corona, it's of course very different from a kind of perspective of who did what and X, Y, Z. But I feel like there's a couple of things around how in 10 years' time, we will still talk about who did what during Corona, who did really take leadership, how did it shape all of us, the whole generation. And so I think it's a beautiful way for us, I think, as individuals, to see new potentiality in terms of to see what really is possible, what really could be done. To your point, that a lot of people now, when you have that collective near-death experience, you wonder, right? Okay, I had COVID a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you, it definitely reminded me of, okay, how quickly life can be over. And it definitely, again, kind of rejuvenated that kind of meaning and search for meaning and trying to figure it out how to do that. And so I think it's a wonderful momentum at the moment to really build on and to say, okay, yes, there is the crisis, but also this crisis can give us meaning. And, I don't want to get too philosophical. I know that you wanted to have a pragmatic answer, but one philosophical answer I'd love to give is, I've been a big fan of Viktor Frankl, and he had this wonderful book around search for meaning. And one of the things that he, as a Holocaust survivor, a lot of times thought about is, how did I, Viktor, survive the concentration camp psychologically? Because physiologically, of course, you didn't have any kind of choice in any leeway. Psychologically, a lot of times when you give up hope, your body very quickly degenerates, right? And you know that better than I do. But the point is, he always wondered, why did I, Viktor, keep that kind of hope? And he always had this beautiful duality of meaning where every day he still tried to find a small bit of meaning in terms of talking with one other prisoner who would feel better about themselves. And by doing this, Viktor would feel much better about himself because he did something small. But also then he still wanted to write this book. So he still had this bigger purpose, this bigger meaning. And I've seen this a lot in personal lives as well, right? That when we try to figure out moments like at the moment where we don't have a lot of anchors, we don't have a lot of things that, we took a lot of things for granted and they're now all very fluid. And if we can build in this duality of purpose, this duality of meaning in terms of saying, what is a day-to-day thing that I can do every day, being that just literally talking with one friend who I know is in a bad place, and by talking with them every day, I know that I can be part of helping them. And at the same time, it actually makes me feel much better, right? It's literally an enlightened self-interest that makes me happier. But also at the same time, really this idea of how do we think now about what is this kind of sense of direction that allows us now to really do the next thing in ways that can help us. And so what that concretely means, a lot of my students at the moment, for example, they had their internships fall through, they had their jobs fall through. None of these things work out anymore. And one of the key things that we've been focused on is to say, okay, what are these kind of serendipity bombs or things you could send out there now, where even if now people are not hiring, that once they start hiring again in a couple of months, that you're the first one in their mind, you're on their radar, you're there. Because at the end of the day, if you still have 70 years to live, it really doesn't matter too much unless you have real deep financial constraints if you get a job 2 months later or 2 months before or whatever. But what does matter is on which trajectory it will put you next, right? So now is a beautiful opportunity to send serendipity bombs, for example, to people who you really admire, and maybe starting working a little bit on the side with them, doing a couple of projects with them that are small scale, but really kind of getting on their radar, getting into their trajectory. And I've seen then, that's where serendipity happens, right? Where the person they work with would say, oh my God, I didn't even realize I wanted to do X, Y, Z, but you know what? Now that you're here, let's do this new project. Let's do this new thing. And I think that's something, Kiran, I'm sure you've seen that. And I remember for the book, we talked about some of your stories, right? You have a lot of serendipity in your life, of course, but it's really this idea of when one door closes, there's a lot of other doors that are opening up. And we might now, for the first time, have that kind of open mind also to to these new kind of things that we could be. And so, long story short, I think the beauty of potentiality of seeing also who else could we be, who could we be if we re-evaluate who we are, really kind of sets us up for potentially something that could be really joyful and meaningful and hopefully add value to our lives.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christian. I think serendipity probably will be part of a new normal if we leverage it properly during this crisis. And I think the mindset is extremely important, and especially at a time that is increasingly uncertain. But I think uncertain is not necessarily a bad thing. It can very often be a positive driver for innovation, for new economy, for everything. So amazing. Thank you very much. So a standard question that we ask everyone as part of the festival is, what does happiness mean to you? I think it's a very open question. I wonder, what do you think? I think it can be there can be quite common answers to this question, but it can also be different, from a different background of the speakers. So what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I've always found it a very challenging thing, because it's something that I've seen a lot in my own life and the life of people around me, that there sometimes seems to be almost like this paradox between contentness, so being in a state of, when I meditate, when I'm in a state where I'm just genuinely content and I'm quote unquote happy in the sense of grounded, and I wouldn't need anything anymore that's out there in the world because I have enough in who I am and who I feel I am. And I love these moments for myself. I love these moments of gratitude, of just being there in the moment. But then also I feel, when I had these kind of moments that remind me that life can be over quickly, that kind of bit to me is more, sometimes that means suffering, that means pain, that means discomfort. It means if you want to build things, if you want to create things, you almost kind of sometimes don't want to be content because you need that kind of discomfort to push and to go further. And so I've always been kind of trying to figure out, like, almost what is a beautiful kind of level of contentness so that you're self-anchored, but then at the same time also keep some kind of discomfort, especially when you're more privileged, in the sense of, I'm extremely like aware of how, I've always worked hard for things, but also I've certainly had much better conditions than a lot of other people in the world. And I want to do justice to that in the sense of not just being content for myself, but actually also building things, doing things that actually are meaningful out there. And so, long story short, I've never had a simple feeling for what that happiness could be that almost brings together the kind of meaning search, which is a lot of times about suffering and painful and being out there, and then the kind of more content, kind of joyful that's just there. I feel there certainly are ways, right, in terms of like how you create processes towards achieving that meaning that are more joyful, and I feel like that's what I'm mostly working on. So long story short, I think the visual that came to mind when you asked was really this idea of like making life this kind of journey rather than like the outcome focus. So happiness really as kind of the process of how I try to go about things. I try to be joyful about it. I try to be enthusiastic about it. And that to me then brings the kind of baseline of happiness that hopefully also reaches others. But again, I feel like that's also why I'm looking forward to hearing the other speakers at the festival, because I feel that I certainly don't have the answers.
Cool. I think it's going to be an open discussion going forward, because I think that the purpose of the Institute is also to explore what does happiness mean, right? I think we will spend a lot more time just to talking to people and different scholars and philosophers to understand, the broader elements of happiness and how do we prioritize it more in the new economy as a primary priority in how we build the future of economy, the future of business, the future of governance, and also how do we help each individual to flourish? I think human flourishing is a term that really inspires me. And I think today we are not there yet, in many ways, because of virus constraints. So it's a fascinating topic and subject. Cool, great. I think the festival itself is almost also a serendipity outcome, because we were not planning this at all. In the beginning of 2020, it just came together somehow with a bunch of friends and people and a lot of amazing speakers. So this is another example of the serendipity mindset. So thank you very much, Christian, for a fascinating talk. And looking forward to your future talks and obviously the book as well. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Kevin and team. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.